It's Jack Quinn. John T is my legal name, but Jack is how I go by. I'm from Thornton, Colorado, which is just north of Denver, Colorado. I've lived in Colorado now for about 30 years. Before that, I lived on the East Coast.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that about you, Jack.
I was born in the Bronx, lived in New Jersey from the time I was 7 until I was 26, and then I moved here.
I see.
Now I'm 66, so I've been here a while. I have 2 hip replacements, and my first hip replacement was not the greatest operation. I wound up with bad internal bleeding. They stretched my trunk nerves too far, so my sciatic and my perineal nerves are damaged. So I had a terrible pain in my right foot that would never go away, that would go up into my leg a bit, but it concentrated around my big toe and in that area of my foot. Eventually I went on morphine because of this. I could hardly walk. And I certainly wasn't sleeping, and I asked someone who was a bartender who I knew could find some cannabis at that point in time to get me some, and I got some cannabis then. That's when I went back to smoking regularly because I was able to sleep somewhat. Fell asleep in the chair that afternoon for the first time in a while.
I see. How did that affect your prescription drugs that you were taking?
That's a conundrum I have right now. I have cut back on my narcotics, but I don't know if my cutting back has been good for me. I've since developed, I guess I've had kidneys that have been slowly getting worse since 2008 is what the lab tests show. But just recently they've gotten quite bad. What I didn't realize was part of when I was doing the high CBD program, my mentor would tell me that I could cut back on my narcotics also. And we were trying to do 2 things at one time, I guess. My skin cancer and my dependence on narcotics, morphine, and I also have Percocets for breakthrough pain. The only problem I didn't realize was that when I cut back on my narcotics, my blood pressure went up. And I didn't know that, and I wasn't doing enough CBDs or any other kind of program to keep my blood pressure down, and that negatively also has affected my kidneys.
I see. Something that wasn't taken in consideration is that the narcotics were actually holding your blood pressure down.
Correct. So just be told to, you can cut back your narcotics, but not having anyone check me out didn't wind up being the greatest thing. As far as my skin cancer goes, just before I moved from New Jersey to Colorado, I had a lump under my left eye, and it had been there for quite a while and didn't seem to be anything special, just a small round lump. But in the 6 months or so prior to moving to Colorado, I had noticed that it was growing in size. I wound up going to an eye doctor, and he said sure he could take that off for me, and we did a little surgery in office. And a week later I was very surprised to get a phone call saying that they did a biopsy and it was a basal cell cancer. I knew nothing about skin cancer at this point in time, so just thinking I had cancer on a spot on my head was very frightening to me. I immediately thought I was going to be dying from cancer rotting out my brains. So I did a lot of research on skin cancer, found out the type I have, basal cell. Very few people anymore had Found it fatal. You would have to go pretty far before it would be fatal, but you would be one big sore by then. Over the years, I would go at first infrequently, and in the last 10 years it became quite frequent to the skin doctor. Every 3 months I would go, and I would have about 4 to 6 spots removed, excised, burned, and then another 10, 20 spots frozen by liquid nitrogen where they scabbed up and came off that way. That went on for at least 10 years, every 3 months. And around the same time this was happening, I had a nephew dying of cancer. So I decided to start looking into cannabis as a cancer fighter, both mainly for my nephew at the time. But then I realized, wow, if I could just show on myself that it worked, maybe I could get him to do it. Unfortunately, he passed long before I ever had the proof, and he lived in a non-legal state and then was not very attuned to it. But I went ahead with a program, a cancer program. I was actually looking for a FECO type program. However, the dispensary I was going to, the gentleman who ran it would always say he had something better, which turned out to be CBDs, and I went into a high CBD program. Within 2 months, my skin cleared up very well, and by about 3 months it had cleared up almost completely. When I went to my next skin doctor visit, he could not find a thing to either excise, nor could he find anything to use the liquid nitrogen on, which he always had no problem. And this was to the point that this time he had me stripped completely, including my boxer shorts. And he was really surprised not to find any spots, and he was looking all over. And so at that point we went another 6 months, during which I stayed on the CBD program as much as I could. There was a problem with supplies fairly often during this period. Eventually, a couple of things happened. My skin cancer came back as I was not doing a complete CBD program, and my income was cut by a third. So I have not been able to do the full program since then. I've tried some topical, and very little seems to be doing much at this point in time. You can look anywhere in my body and see an amazing amount of scarring. There's a spot on my shoulder that's this big where I just had a recurring cancer come back, and a recent pink spot, which is one of the 4 cancers I had taken off in December. It seems that area just keeps growing more basal cells, and what it is about 5 or 6 areas now combined into one big scar. Well, I've also had a number of surgeries called Mohs surgery, M-H-O-S, who's the name of the doctor. 2 years ago I had Mohs surgery on this year. In Mohs surgery, they take a spot, patch you up, and they send the spot out, and they keep going all that day until they get a clear spot. So it took 6.5 hours to do this year with 7 different excisions, and when it was done, the top half of my ear was gone, and they had to reconstruct my ear, which left a good-sized notch in my ear. And that neck also has its fair share of scars. Worst spot right now is right here on my arm. At its worst times, you can see the flaky skin on top of it. You can feel that it's raised from the rest of my skin, and it has a roughly rectangular shape right now. Also, in the last 10 years, I've had a lot more squamous cell carcinomas as well as the basal cell carcinomas, and they seem to be a little bit deeper and can become a systemic cancer in your liver or whatever, lymph nodes. Most squamous cell are like the basal cell are on your skin, and most are removed. If they're removed as soon as you find them, there's no problem. But I just personally found that I wound up with a little bit deeper hole after the squamous cell was removed than the basal cell. And they might have just been on fleshier parts of me. I had a big one in the middle of my back, for instance. I should say I spent my summers at the seashore in Rockaway Beach, Long Island, where I was a kid, and this was pre-sunscreen. And then as a teenager, I was a lifeguard, and this was also pre-SPF factor, and we would compound things by using baby oil and iodine. So that is probably the origin of most of my skin cancers. However, I've had at least one doctor theorize that I must have something wrong with my immune system, that I don't fight them. So that's probably a combination of things.
I see. Your biggest challenge has been financial, hasn't it?
At this point, definitely. You can live going every 3 months and getting spots cut, and if you have insurance, they don't charge them. I can't imagine if I didn't have insurance what I would do. But then you live constantly with scabs, little itchy, painful spots healing up on your body. As soon as one area is done, you're back at the doctor's office for more. So finding a cure would be ideal to keep this from happening. And this is only one of multiple conditions I have where I could find a cure, but this is the easiest to address.
It's heartbreaking, though, because you've already experienced what it's like to not have to be cut on anymore.
Correct.
And now having to go back to that. Oh.
Yeah. And my skin doctor was kind of chuckling when I came back, because he says, I forced him into researching it, and now is a believer that it can help, but at what cost? He said you could come here every 3 months for $35, which is $70, $140 a year, or I could go back on the program I was on, which costs over $400 a month.
Who on a fixed income can afford that much money?
Yes, I should mention I am on a fixed income. I had long-term disability, and that ran out, so I'm just on Social Security disability, same as my wife. And she has a tiny pension, $200 in addition.
I see. I never thought I would be sitting across from a patient in Colorado who could not afford their medication.
I think everyone thought that once Colorado went legal, it was just going to be, wow, look at this. Instead of realizing that all the dispensaries now have jacked up all the prices incredibly for the retail patients. And I believe all use is medical. It's not just medical patients. I believe all use is medical. So what they're calling retail patients now are paying exorbitant prices. So those people aren't getting anything but cursory relief also.
So patients need their medicine, and they need a continuous supply.
It would be lovely if it was covered by insurance, but that day's got a long way off yet.
That's pretty good, Jack. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.